Well, I mean, it seems obvious to me that when you've got a school system that's paid for by taxpayers, that school system shouldn't set out to put any religious ideology onto young people. And that's and that might seem like a very simple thing to say, but the reality is that that's a very, very long way from what we actually have right now. That actually right now, loads and loads of schools across Scotland, across the whole of the UK, have an enormously heavy religious agenda. Teachers are selected on the basis of religion, and those that don't fit the school's ideology are then told, you have to say this, you have to adhere to this. And certainly we hear a lot of worrying stories about schools that are teaching things like creationism, and I'm always left wondering, not that I want young people taught about, always left wondering, those schools that teach creationism, what does the sex education curriculum look like? And I've got a feeling it looks like, and certainly from the work I do with Abortion Rights UK, we get a lot of quite shocking feedback about things that young people are being told about their bodies, and just outright misinformation about, oh, abortion's terribly dangerous and it's going to lead to infertility and blah 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 blah, and all this absolute nonsense. So that has to come out. And I also think a big chunk of school time, certainly when I went to school, I went to school in England, to a Church of England school, and a lot of time got eaten up with singing hymns and doing this, and I'm absolutely not against teaching a bit of cultural history. But we should be clear that there's a difference between saying this is the tradition of the past and this is what the architecture looks like, and telling young people that they should subscribe to this or that there's some advantage to doing so. Well, I mean, obviously no, I don't think that's the right thing to be doing in schools. It seems obvious to me that, this sort of thing, parents have got all day Saturday and all day Sunday to do whatever it is that they want to do with their children, to drag them round to church or synagogue or whatever they want to do. Couldn't we just agree that the Monday to Friday, the school hours, are about education? And I think that putting religious observance into schools is incredibly misleading, because what we tell our children when they come to school is, this stuff is true. You can believe this stuff. Don't believe what you see on television. Don't believe that, things without questioning them. But this is school, and what we tell you at school, it's about evidence and it's about truth. And so one minute we're saying, this is how science works, this is how chemicals can be used, and this is how the physical universe works. And then the next minute we turn around and go, this is what angels do. And that's enormously confusing for young people. It's like, you shouldn't have children going to school and being told, now remember, Santa will come on Christmas Eve. Your parents can tell you that if they want to in their free time, or your parents might be rationalists and decide not to tell you that stuff. That's up to them. But to go into school and have somebody telling you this kind of stuff, I think it's just misleading for children, because it implies that this is some sort of fact-based thing. And when they talk about religious observance and religious instruction, it's not about teaching what are the theories here. It's about teaching this as if it's true without questioning it. And we should teach young people to question everything. Of course we should. Well, I don't understand the whole, to me that's fundamentally anti-democratic. What we clearly should do is let people vote, and if they all want to vote for a Catholic representative, they can do, and if they all want to vote for a representative of some other religion, again, they can do. If they were going to say we've got to be super balanced, then obviously what they should do then is survey the whole population and find out what the distribution of religion is, and they're sure going to find that a big chunk of the population up here is atheist, agnostic, rationalist, etc. So if they're really going to go down this road, then obviously they'd have to appoint 2 non-believing reps to each board as well, which I can't see that happening. And even then I wouldn't be happy, because then the trouble is, I find with these organisations, is that when you ask for a Catholic representative, they actually don't pick somebody who represents the Catholic faith. Actually, they don't pick somebody who is an average Catholic, who's like, well, I go to church a few times a year, but I'm still kind of pro-choice and I'm still kind of reasonable and I don't kind of go the whole hog. When you ask for a Catholic representative, you get somebody who thinks that every word the Pope says is fact and must never be questioned. And actually that's one of the problems with religion in a way, is that if we started a political party today, we would pick out of our number the person with average views to be our leader. But religious organisations don't do that. They pick the most religious person to be their leader. So the Pope doesn't in any way represent ordinary Catholics, and Archbishop Welby doesn't represent ordinary Church of Englanders. In fact, ordinary Church of England, most of them don't even believe in God, and but the leaders are always the most extreme people, and we see that as well with lots of Muslim organisations, that we get people coming out and making statements, and you know that the average Muslim on the streets thinks this is an absolute nonsense, but instead they're picked as the representatives. I think that's a real shame. So secularism is enormously important, and it might sound like an incredibly simple concept. Secularism is the idea that we shouldn't give anybody special privileges because of what they believe, whether that's something or nothing or something else, or still not being sure. And that seems really, really fundamentally obvious to me. And the weird thing is that it's so far from what we have, that we have such a long way to go to even get to that point. So we have, we have bishops in the House of Lords, we have religious privilege like we've talked about on school boards, we have state-funded schools pushing religion onto young people. We have this situation where churches are tax exempt and treated as charities, even though a lot of what they do is often proselytising, and a lot of what they do is really maintaining themselves and paying the salaries of the people who work for them. Who incidentally have to be men. We couldn't possibly adhere to regular employment law like anybody else with your taxpayers' funded money. So, we're so far away from it, and that's just in this country, and this country, whether we're talking about Scotland or Great Britain, that's just this country. Then we pan around the rest of the world and we see, women can't vote. What's that? Committed adultery, we're going to stone you to death. I'm sorry, have you got a clitoris? Not anymore. It starts to get ridiculous. We're so far off the scale, and people always say, but it's cultural. And the reality is, when you ask the people who are denying women the vote what they're doing and why they're doing it, they don't say, it's cultural. They say, this is my religion. My God told me to do this. And so we have to question that. And I think religious people are very afraid of secularism, and I think that's because when we're allowed to question things, a lot of what they believe really doesn't hold any water, and they're still allowed to believe it, even if it doesn't hold any water. But we're definitely allowed to question it, and I think that people are very afraid of that. Well, you see, I think they shouldn't, because what is your goal as an organisation? Is it to continue to believe exactly the thing that you've always believed and never have that questioned? If that's your goal, well, what good are you doing as an organisation? Surely as an organisation, if your goal is to support young people and to build stronger communities and all this kind of stuff, well, then great, you don't need organised religion to do that, and you don't need your religion to go unquestioned in order to do that. Actually, it's brilliant to be able to question these things, because we know that historically lots of the churches supported slavery and had very negative attitudes towards women, towards gay people, and on the whole, those things are mostly changing. But if we continue to change, and if these religions are to continue to develop, secularism is absolutely the best thing for them. The alternative is for them to be entrenched in their ways, and we see this quite often with these sort of very small minority. Yeah. And we see that when you look at communities like, for example, the Hasidic Jewish community or the Amish community, even like certain groups of sort of Jehovah's Witnesses, Mormons, these kind of groups. What you see is a group of people whose values have become massively, massively out of date. And we might have quite good rights for LGBT people in the UK these days, but if you're LGBT in those kind of minority communities, it's still a nightmare. And so the more firmly entrenched your religious organisation becomes, I think in the long run that means you lose pace with modern morality, and I think that's really dangerous and damaging. So the reality is, yes, I think these organisations have a lot to gain from secularism, but one thing they might gain is that people go, well, you know what, I like coming to church and I like singing songs, but I don't actually believe this stuff. And I think that leaders are afraid of that. They're afraid that if they go down that road, people then won't go to church, and the answer is they have to offer something to people. I live down the road from a Unitarian church, and they have a big sign outside that says a church for atheists and everybody else, and they have really interesting meetings there, and they have really lovely carol concerts there, and we were there a few months ago for a gay couple's wedding, and they're living in the 21st century, and the last thing they try and do is tell anybody that they should be religious if they don't want to be. So I think that churches can survive, but it might take a lot of adaptation and updating, yeah. Well, yeah, I mean that's quite a broad political question, and what should Scotland become after independence, or instead of independence, whatever it ends up getting. I think that the good news in a way for Scottish people is that on the whole, Scotland, if it were to go independent or gain some more freedoms, let's say, on the whole, it's quite a left-wing, quite a compassionate country. Already, you have some advantages that, from the point of view of an Englander up for the fringe, you've still got no tuition fees in universities. Your healthcare system is a little bit protected against the ravages that we're getting south of the border. So I think, firstly, you should be optimistic that you can continue to. I mean, if I was Scotland, I'd go independent and then I'd become a part of Scandinavia, because I think that. I do a lot of work in Sweden and Norway, and I think, wow, this place is so cool. And okay, the beer is expensive, but at the end of the day, the healthcare is great. And they're just the economic divide. You just don't see people as poor as you do in the UK. There's just it's a much more supported culture. And it's much, much better in terms of gender equality as well. It's absolutely amazing. I could bang on all day about the Swedish model on prostitution, but what they've done is they've completely decriminalised prostitution so that women working in that industry, and men as well, are not criminalised, but they've made it illegal to buy sex. And as a result, the industry has shrunk to about 5% of its previous size. They've seen net zero trafficking in people into the country since they brought that in. And it's fascinating. There is just a different vibe. You just plus you get a whole year's paternity leave, as well as a year's maternity leave. You see men in the streets with pushchairs, and you go, "Why is that weird? Oh, that looks weird. I'm not used to seeing that." Yeah, if I was Scotland, I'd float off and attach to Sweden, but that might just be me. Now, also, since we're on the subject of secularism, I mean, the Scandinavian countries are enormously secular, and they don't put religion into schools, and they're very, very clear and very, very careful about making sure that when a range of views are required, that secular voices are amongst those and atheist voices are amongst those. They really don't do that thing of saying, well, the church had special treatment. They're very, very careful about that, and yeah, that's what I would do. Sail off and join Scandinavia, that's my advice. So my name's Kate Smurthwaite, and I support Edinburgh Secular Society.